Hello everyone, Lytro Storm here, and today I'll be starting a new Walking Dead What If, since What If Kenny Survived has now ended. Today we'll be looking at What If Javier was in Season 1. So when I say Javier, I also mean Gabe, Mariana, and Kate from A New Frontier. I'll be introducing them into the first season and seeing what would change if they met everyone. I mean, I've always thought it would be cool to see Javier and Lee meet, but they never actually do, because Lee dies. So let's actually see what happens if they did. If you guys end up enjoying the video, please be sure to like it as it shows me you want more videos like this. Also, less than half of my viewers are subscribed, so if you like seeing my content, you can always see more by subscribing. As always, be sure to join my Discord and follow me on Twitter. Links in the description. So, in what episode will I be introducing the Garcias into Season 1? There are plenty of opportunities, however I think the best one would be in Episode 2. Episode 2 takes place a little more than 3 months after the apocalypse, and I know the Garcias waited 3 months for David to come home, so here I would just cut the wait down by a few weeks to a month, and say they ended up driving to the area that Season 1 takes place in. So, how I would introduce them into Episode 2 would be when Lee, Mark, Ben, and Carly/Doug are going with the St. John's to check out their dairy. Along the way, they come across a van that is broken down. They find 4 people there, and the St. John's say hello. Javier and the rest of the Garcias are very defensive at first, but Andy lets them know that they aren't going to hurt them. Andy's brother Danny then follows that up by saying that if they would have gotten them while they didn't see them. This kind of adds a little bit of suspicion to them, which will come to a head later in the episode. The Garcias and our main group would exchange names. Now, you guys know that Javi can be a few different types of character, depending on your choices. Here though, I'm going to be adapting the charming, nicer version, as I feel like it fits better for his character. The others would tell the family that they could help them on fuel in exchange for a little work at their dairy. The Garcias would take this as little more than an act of kindness, and thusly venture back with the rest of the group. Here, Lee would have some dialogue with Javi as the two try to get to know each other. Lee can have the option to talk about Duck and Clementine and how they may become friends with their kids if they get to meet. Javi then tells Lee that these aren't their kids. He is their uncle and Kate is their stepmom, so the two could then bond over the fact that they're basically but not really fathers. They also can talk about the life before the Walkers, baseball player and teacher, and even Lee's group. I think Javi and Lee could have the opportunity to begin blooming a friendship here. Anyway, they arrive at the dairy and Carly/Doug and Ben head back to the motel to get the rest of the group. Meanwhile, Mark and Lee go to fix the fence while the Garcias just kinda chill and maybe do some light work at the dairy. If you don't end up fixing the swing, then maybe they do it themselves. Lee and Mark would get a bit more dialogue about the Garcias and their opinions on them, which Mark would feel like they seem like good people. Mark is then shot with an arrow, and they make it back to the dairy as the raiders shoot at them. When they make it back, the rest of the group arrives and is not happy since they were told the place would be safe. Brenda took Mark in like in canon, and Lee would talk to everyone before heading out with Danny. Gabe and Mariana would be playing with Clem and Duck on the swing as well. Lee talking to Kate would get some dialogue about how she feels about kids in this new world. Anyway, Lee goes out with Danny and finds Clementine's hat along with Jolene. Nothing new here. As they return, Kenny reveals that he's been doing some investigating with Javier to find out if this place is legit. You and Kenny then poke around and potentially end up finding the room with all the blood and stuff. Lee then goes upstairs and finds Mark with no legs and heads back down to stop Clementine from eating. He tries to convince everyone about what has happened, resulting in everyone being taken into the locker. Lee would wake up, talk to Clem, and eventually Larry would have his heart attack. I think Javi would actually try and reason with not killing him, as there's 3 grown men there, and they could easily use the salt licks as soon as they start to hear the classic Walker groaning. Kenny concedes to this, realizing that he wouldn't win this argument, especially if Lee backs Javi up. Either Lee or Javi would then attempt to revive him, but as soon as his mouth began to move, Kenny would seize this moment to crush Larry's head. This is because I think it would be in character, and we have no idea if Larry would have survived the heart attack, even if he was alive when he moved his mouth. Everyone would be mad at Kenny, But eventually they'd find the coins in Larry's pocket, and Lee would use them to open the vents. You would have to convince Clementine to go through, and if you tell her that you know she's brave enough, then she will. However, another dialogue option would result in Gabe calling through instead. He opens the door and shows everyone how brave he is. Alright, moving past this, Kenny and Lee move forward and end up taking on Danny. Depending on your bond with Kenny, he may or may not help you, and if he doesn't, then Lily will. Lee then chooses to spare or kill Danny, and heads out with Javier to get back Katja and Duck. The two split up after Lee finds Brenda with Katja, and Mark's Walker comes in with the save. Afterward, Kenny would be shot by Andy, but he would then be attacked by Javier. The two would battle, but Andy ends up pulling the dub, and Lee has to join in. This leads to a somewhat easier battle, with Lily or Javier saving Lee to near the end. Lily with her rifle, and Javier just by pulling him off. Spare Andy, and the group escapes from the dairy. As they walk, Lee talks to Javier and Kate once more, and some dialogue is changed depending on if Gabe or Clementine went into the vent. If Gabe did, Lee will compliment his bravery, and if Clem did, then the latter will do so. Lee would also thank Javier for the save if he saved him toward the end. Our protagonist asks if they're going to stick around, and Javier responds that after everything that went down, he's seen that they are trustworthy and a good group. Kate finishes by saying that it would be best for them to have people like them, and the kids obviously wouldn't object to staying with their new friends. The camera would then pan to Gabe and Mariana talking with Clem and Duck and just having fun like kids do. Kate adds that she's very grateful for them, as if they weren't there, they likely would have lost the struggle. Kenny then announces that they found the car filled with stuff, which everyone would have their sides on like in canon. Kate and Gabe would want to take it, while Mariana wouldn't alongside Clem, and Javi is down for whatever. With Lee being the final decider, Javi and Clem would depend on his decision. Bottom line, the episode ends with Lee finding out about Jolene. Episode 3 would begin with Lee and Kate going on a run instead of Lee and Kenny. I was gonna put Javi here, but since Kate hasn't really gotten to do much, I'll put her here instead. The reasoning would be that Kenny is wounded by the gunshot, and if the group has 2 more able-bodied people, why bring the injured man? Anyway, Lee and Kate would go through the town, and would be talking along the way. Kate would tell how she wanted to leave, and do something since she barely goes on runs. Plus, with Kenny and Lily's constant arguing, it just seems like everyone's on edge, so it's better to get away. Lee can then ask about her thoughts on the Kenny and Lily situation, ask about her life before the Walkers, or tell about how the kids are getting along. With the first option, she will say that she doesn't care what happens as long as the group sticks together, so Kenny can't just grab the RV and drive away. The second would be that she was Javi's brother's wife, and talk about how he was in the military. And the final choice would lead to her saying that the kids are all pretty good friends already. As you're walking, you would bring up the supplies and how they're going by so fast. Kate would then take this and offer Lee to know a secret. No matter how you respond, even if you say no, she'll tell you anyway. Kate essentially says that she's been using a small bit of the drugs. Lee asks why, suggesting that she may have been injured or something. She tells him no, and that she's been doing the drugs rather than using them. This is pretty in character with Kate, considering the scenes and dialogue in A New Frontier. Lee will then respond shocked, understanding, or neutral. The others are self-explanatory, but the neutral will just see him express that he doesn't care as long as she doesn't use too much. It could be needed one day, nobody really knows. Kate tells Lee not to tell anyone, but then they hear some screaming. It's the woman from Canon running from walkers. She gets bitten, and Lee can either put her out of her misery, or continue to the pharmacy. Kate will say that they should go and just leave her there, as she needs to get enough stuff to make up for her use of the drugs. Either way, they go into the pharmacy, grab some stuff, and go. Kate will save you from the walkers no matter what, because unlike Kenny, she won't leave you to die if you mess up one time. Come on, Kenny, I didn't have your back once, so it's okay for me to die? I mean, who do you think you are?
I am a Christian man.
Fair point. Anyway, you make it back to the motel and find Kenny and Lily arguing about whether they should stay or should they go. Lee and Kate break it up and give Lily the supplies that you found. Kenny brings the argument back up, and so Lily freaks out, yelling that someone has been stealing supplies. Now this would actually be great within the story if it was actually canon. Imagine you're playing for the first time, and Kate tells you about how she's been using the drugs. Then Lily says that someone is stealing them. You would assume it was Kate, and so the story would have you go in that direction, but you'd later find out who it actually was. I think that would actually be really cool in an alternate universe from a gaming perspective, but anyway, back to the story at hand. Lee would then do all of his investigation, and if you have Carly, then you can do the whole telling people you're a murderer thing. This time, it would have Kate and Javier as options to tell as well. Telling Kate would result in her not really caring as long as you kept her secret. And telling Javi would also lead to him not caring and saying that it just might come in handy as well. When talking to Lily, Lee can also have the option about Kate's secret, saying that she told him that she took a little bit extra. Lily will then exclaim, "A little?" calling her a druggie and saying that she's going to get everyone killed by doing that. She informs Lee that there's a lot more gone than just a little, and that he needs to find more evidence, as everyone in the group is already on edge, and with Javi they'll probably have some opposition against their claims. Lee then leaves, eventually finding all the proof and evidence until he takes his supplies out of the grate. When he reports it back to Lily, everyone is held hostage by the bandits outside. Lily dips like in canon, and Lee goes out to negotiate. She returns to shoot one of the guys, resulting in everyone escaping. Now, I'd like to explain a mechanic that's in the actual game. In the scene where you have to aim down both sides of the RV and shoot at walkers and bandits, if you have Carly, she will cover one side on her own, leaving you with only one to cover. But if you have Doug, you have to do both sides on your own, but Doug will call out enemies on either side. Here, Javier will be assisting you by taking the right side. If you have Carly, then they both cover that side because Lee is the main protagonist with all the godly plot armor and he can do stuff on his own. If you have Doug, then Javier covers it on his own, but with Doug calling out enemies being much more effective. This leads into the scene where Katja and Duck are attacked by a walker, but this time, since there was a whole extra man shooting, that walker is killed before it can ever even attack them. This means that we've prevented Duck from being bitten, which will, for now at least, save both him from turning and Katja from suicide. And this will also lead to Kenny not getting his character arc throughout the season. The gang then pack into the RV, with it being much more cramped, but still manageable. On the road, Lily accuses Ben or Kate depending on if you told her Kate's secret. If you did, this will obviously expose you, and Kate will now dislike you. Eventually, things will escalate once Kenny runs over a walker. Everyone gets out, and that's when Lily finally tips over the edge and pulls out a gun. However, with Javier there, he manages to barely stop her from shooting Ben/Kate. Unfortunately, the shot lands on another victim, Carly or Doug. So yes, while the change is there, Carly and Doug will still die in this what if. The group is enraged by this, but they vote to leave Lily behind no matter what Lee says. It only makes sense given that Kate and Javi are there, and Lily just potentially shot at Kate. Kenny continues driving, and everyone else goes to sleep, and in the morning, they find the train and meet Chuck. Kenny and Lee try to fix the train up to get it working, while everyone else just chills out. Once the train is working, since Duck isn't bitten, the whole argument with Kenny never happens, the train never stops for the group to put down Duck, which means Katja never shoots herself, lessening the time by a lot. We'll get back to that in a bit, but for now, without Duck's death, Lee's inspiration from Chuck to train Clementine doesn't show, at least not in that way. I think Chuck would instead tell Lee that about half of the group are children who can't do anything to defend themselves. It's extremely likely that any of them could die. Lee takes this and decides to cut Clem's hair and begin teaching her how to shoot. Javier actually sees this and decides to do the same for Gabe, since Gabe is always wanting to do something to help and seems more mature than Mariana. Now without Katja and Duck's death, Kenny wouldn't undergo his character arc. This means that he would be in a much more stable mental condition and would not be developing as a character nearly as much. Anyway, all the time saved results in them not meeting Omid and Krista, at least not yet. That change is then completely undone when they do the investigation on both the bridge and the house. Omid and Krista would show up and meet with the group, offering to help. In the house investigation, Javi and Gabe accompany Clem and Lee, helping them by taking out all the walkers outside the building. After this, since everything goes by much quicker, the walker horde never shows up until much later after the group has already boarded the train. Omid will still fall and injure his leg though, since the truck falls onto the ladder. The group escapes, and Kenny and Lee hear the stranger on Clementine's walkie-talkie. Where we last left off, we had just finished up episode 3 of season 1. So now we're going to move into episode 4. Now episode 4 begins with our group, now made up of Lee, Clementine, Kenny, Katja, Duck, Javi, Kate, Gabe, Mariana, Krista, Omid, Ben, and Chuck, a much larger group than in canon, way bigger. And so because of this, I do not see Chuck dying during this Walker Street scene. Firstly, they arrive earlier, so there's no telling if there would be as many walkers. And secondly, his death in canon is kinda dumb. Like, it's an open street, and you can clearly cut through the walkers. There really aren't that many when you look at it. But he just chooses to stay behind for what reason exactly? Here, with quite a few more people, there's no way he's getting pinned down like he did in canon. The whole group escapes and makes it to the house, where they get inside, using the dog collar, and begin searching for supplies. Afterward, Kenny would go out with Lee to look for boats, and Chuck would want to come with. This time, they would be hoping that they find multiple, as just one would definitely not fit their group of 13. Everyone knows this, and Kenny's idea faces even more criticism because of this. Nevertheless, they still try. Upon going, they find Molly, who Lee and Chuck promptly outmaneuver. This means that there would be no gunshot from Kenny, since he wouldn't be on edge, and would stop once Chuck and Lee tell him to. The three talk to Molly and learn about Crawford, as well as that the boats were all taken. Molly eventually decides to dip, not wanting to join a group with a failing idea. The three men then head back to the house, where Lee hears something in the shed. He opens it to find Mariana and Clementine. The two were exploring the house and found the shed, which inside held a boat. Kenny sees this and is shocked, but everyone tells him that there's no way this plan will work with just a single boat. This means that Kenny would be all alone with his idea. With even Katja knowing that they had to stick together with the group, they couldn't just go off with a couple of people and leave everyone else for dead. Everyone would be against him, leading to a scene where he storms off and Lee has to go talk to him. He heads upstairs to the attic and finds Kenny looking at the Walker child. There, he would express his worry for Duck's safety and how this kid embodied his fear. This is what would happen to Duck if he didn't go through with his plan. This adds sympathy to Kenny, now having everyone turned away from him. As Lee, you can indulge Kenny's idea, not wanting to hurt him, you can understand him but disagree, or you could tell him that his idea is absolutely stupid. This would once again change your relationship with Kenny, giving you different loyalty points depending on what you did. You then kill the Walker child yourself or let Kenny do it. He comes down telling everyone that he's alright. He has basically let go of the plan, and everyone wonders what they're going to do now. There is no plan at this point. That was their only one, and it's half-baked. Clementine then says that if there aren't any plans, then they can try and find her parents. They have the map that shows the Marsh house, so all they have to do is go there. Lee will then tell her that they can tomorrow, to which she is slightly upset, not as much as in canon. Everyone gets some sleep, and upon waking up, Lee finds Clementine missing. He searches outside, eventually finding her hat, which leads him to be bitten on the wrist, just like in canon. Everyone goes outside, and Lee can now choose to conceal his bite or show it, once again just like in canon. Now originally, Lee has two ways to recruit Omid and Krista on his trek to find Clem. If he leaves Clementine with Omid while they go to Crawford, or if he reveals the bite. Here, since they never go to Crawford, you can only get them to go with you if you reveal the bite. Kenny will go with you if you have a high friendship level with him throughout the season, or if you tell him that Clementine is your family. If your loyalty isn't high, then he will say the iconic line that he says in canon,
I am a Christian man.
Ben will come with you if you tell him to think about Clem, and Javi will come no matter what. Throughout this season, he's kinda just been the middleman. He doesn't really care. He's just going with whoever. He does like Lee though, so. Kate would choose to stay behind along with Katja and the kids to make sure that they're safe. Lastly, Chuck will tell you that this is exactly what he had warned you about. Remember back in part 2 when Chuck gives Lee the warning about what could happen to Clementine. He basically just says that you have to do this without him, as it's something that you have to do. He then asks if you're ready to do this. Lee would say yes and head toward the Marsh house with his crew. Now because there is no Vernon and the cancer survivor shenanigans, as well as no Crawford quest, episode 4 and 5 would be significantly shorter. This would actually be where episode 4 ends, maybe with the stranger calling and talking to Lee like in the end of the actual episode 4, just minus all the Vernon stuff. Anyway, let's call that a wrap for episode 4 and begin the 5th episode. Now this would go much different with the same concept, with the group going from rooftop to rooftop to try and get to the Marsh house while avoiding the walkers. Once on the rooftop with the sign that Lee tried to cross in canon, Lee passes out. This led to way more walkers appearing in the time where he is asleep, and them realizing that they have to do something. Lee eventually comes to and remembers the bells that Molly rang at some point in episode 4, and says that someone has to ring it to clear out all the walkers. Here's who goes and who stays, depending on who you have with you. Obviously, if you have Javi, he will go to do it. If you have one other person along with Javi or Krista and Omid, Javi will still do it while the others stay. If you have Javi, Kenny, and Ben, Kenny will go. If you have Javi, Kenny, Krista, and Omid, both Kenny and Javi will go. If you have Javi, Ben, Omid, and Krista, then Krista and Javi will go. And lastly, if you have everyone, then Kenny and Krista will go. Anyway, once they leave to go ring the bell, and Lee has said some brief dialogue with himself or whoever stayed about him not coming back and why they should protect Clementine and all that, he will pass out yet again and be awoken by the bell. He would then say goodbye to everyone or pray or something if he's alone. He heads down with much less walkers and with both arms, a cleaver in one and a glass shard in the other. He kills any walkers he has to and makes it inside the Marsh house. There, he and the stranger talk about Lee's choices, before Clementine or Lee ends up killing him. A walker then comes out of the closet. Wow, I didn't expect to be saying that sentence, but hey, it's 2020, I won't judge. Anyway, the two leave after Lee covers them both in guts, and as they leave, they find a few walkers still straggling behind. Among them are Clementine's parents, seen only before Lee passes out. Clem brings him to the police station and fights off the walker before Lee tells her to shoot him or leave him. After this, cut to black. Reopen with Clementine walking toward the house and opening the door in a POV shot, seeing the entire group surprised to see her. And that is where season 1 ends. As for 400 days, I can see that still playing out the same, even with Vernon not finding the boat. They'd have to leave the bunker at some point because of food, so the only change would be that Bree and potentially Vernon would be alive, and with the group we see in Shell's story. Either way, they'd probably die, or at least be unknown since Shell and Becca end up alone. After the tragedy of Lee's death, our group would leave Savannah and try to move to the countryside. The group would eventually pull up to the gas station that Omid, Krista, and Clementine did in canon, and the girls and guys would all split up. But this time, since the woman should see the whole squad pulling up, she would never show up to threaten Clementine or anybody else. And even if she did, she would be dismissed instantly. I mean, she didn't even have a weapon, and this is our whole group. This means that our whole group would make it out of there alive with no Omid death. So when we cut to 16 months later, Krista and Omid would already have their child. Now because this baby's name and gender aren't really going to play too big of a factor for now, I'll let you guys decide what they are. Is it a boy? Is it a girl? What's their name? You choose in the comments and I'll pick my favorite. And yes, Savage, you can't just DM me on Discord what the name should be, you have to comment it. But anyway, moving on, our group would not have much in terms of weapons, most of them having basic melee items. They're in the forest trying to start a fire while it rains slightly. Chuck and Javi would go to find more wood, and Clementine would choose to tag along. Since Clementine is going and Javi is too, Gabe will follow. As they walk, they talk about weapons, with Chuck only having his trusty shovel and revolver with one bullet. Other than that, Kenny has a rifle and Javi has a pistol. Everyone else is either unarmed or has like a knife or a screwdriver or like a stick or something. The group of thugs from in canon show up, aiming their guns at our 4. They ask them where the rest of their group is, but all of them insist that they're alone. Eventually, the rest of the group hears this, and Kenny shoots one of the guys. Chuck and Javi would then start attacking with their gun and shovel, leaving only one guy left. However, then walkers would start to show up after hearing all the gunshots. Clementine gets grabbed by the remaining man, and nobody aims to kill him because they don't want Clem to be hurt. He runs over to the river where everyone begins to surround him, and jumps in, seeing no other way. He gets shot by Javi as he jumps. The group rushes in after Clementine, with some of them diving in while the others just ran along the stream. Clementine would wake up where she does in canon, and it would be morning. She would look around to see Gabe and Javi on the ground as well. She would wake them up asking if they were alright, to which they would reply that they're fine. They would all look around until they heard Omid's voice yelling from across the water. Clementine would turn around to see the whole group there. They would begin to swim across, and all would once again meet up. Everyone would be happy that they're alive and well, and so they continue. What I wanted to do was actually separate the group and have like half the people come with Clementine, but I really couldn't find a way that the thugs would manage to overpower or outmaneuver that many people. I really don't see anyone else diving in after Clementine either, since Omid and Krista have a baby, and Kenny needs to stay with his family. And if I just left it as Clem, Javi, and Gabe, then it wouldn't be that interesting because the next season, A New Frontier, is centered around the Garcias and Clem, and, well, so is this entire What If, so it'd just be too much. But anyway, moving on. The squad then rolls up into the woods and comes across a dog. They find that his name is Sam before finding some beans in a can. Clementine chooses whether or not to share and is then bitten by him, but luckily Mariana and Gabe both help to take him off. This leads to Sam being impaled on the spike and Javi putting him down. The group continues through the woods and eventually comes across Pete and Luke. When they ask if Clementine is bitten, the group can safely say no, since they all witnessed the dog bite her, and plus Clementine is a vet, so that would help as well. Luke and Pete then bring the whole group back to their cabin, where the whole squad is questioning who they are. However, the idea of Carver sending a huge group with so many kids like this would be even more stupid than Clementine alone being a spy. By the end, they allow her to use the medical supplies and she gets her arm fixed up. The two groups would then talk and get to know each other, with Clem, Gabe, Mariana, and Duck all meeting Sarah and starting to bond with her. Mariana would probably be the closest with Sarah since she seemed more innocent and liked books and stuff like that. Ben would also get along well with Nick, since they're both very similar in that they mess up a lot, but they always want to be better. Of course, that isn't what they would bond over, but you get the point. At night, everyone would be staying in their rooms, while our massive group would be cramped in the living room and probably the kitchen as well. In the morning, Ben and Clementine join Nick and Pete on their hunting trip, and it is here when we see Nick and Ben talking and actually becoming friends. At the same time, Pete would be telling Nick's story about the deer to Clementine just like in canon. They wouldn't come across all the dead bodies of the people who attacked you and your group, since, well, they took care of those guys before. Eventually though, the walkers would start pouring in and jumping them, and Pete would get bitten on the leg. Ben would then go after Nick, and Clementine can choose to go with Nick and Ben or Pete. That would then end episode 1 of season 2. However, we're not going to end it here just yet, we're going to move on into episode 2. If you went with Pete, everything would go the exact same like it did if you went with Pete in canon. The only difference would be that you would never get the option to say that cutting off a bitten limb wouldn't work, since Lee never did it in this timeline. Eventually, Pete would sacrifice himself for Clementine, seeing that he had no way out, and that would be it. As for Nick, Ben would be along with him as well, and would be encouraging him to leave. When he finishes talking about how he killed his mom, Ben sympathizes with him. He had already lost his friend and teacher back in season 1, and he admits that he was the reason someone else died to a bullet that should have been for him. So this would be when he actually fesses up that he was the one who gave the bandits supplies all the way back in season 1, because he never admitted it before. He finally finishes by telling Nick about how he never made it back home and that he doesn't know what happened to his family. This is similar to him standing up to Kenny in season 1, only that never happened in this version. So with new confidence, Nick stands up and prepares to leave with Clementine and Ben. He then draws all the walkers away from them, resulting in the two escaping. Everyone would be sad that Nick and Pete didn't make it back, but luckily Nick would come back eventually. They would go out to find Pete's body, leaving our season 1 group and Sarah at the house. Carver would have never showed up because he likely would have seen just how many people there were, so him scouting out the place alone would just be stupid. And that is why he would instead have his whole squad pull up a while after the cabin group returned. Alright, so where we left off, Carver and his men were about to storm the cabin, so now they're gonna do that. This would be while all the kids are playing in Sarah's room and, talking to each other. They would all begin to hide as Carver and his group begin rounding everyone up. Even with far superior numbers, they aren't a match for the weaponry Carver has. He then sends Troy upstairs to get Sarah and the kids, and that's when Gabe realizes what he has to do. He takes out the small revolver that we see him use in A New Frontier and stands at the door. Clementine can choose whether to convince him to hide or hide by herself. If Clementine hides by herself, Troy would knock Gabe onto the ground. You could then try to pick up the gun or stay hidden. If you pick it up, you shoot, but he moves out of the way before you fire. He would then body Clem and force everyone out of the room. If you stay hidden, then he picks it up and aims it at Gabe, threatening to kill him if nobody comes out. Clem, Duck, Mariana, and Sarah all do though. And going back to the initial choice, if you convince Gabe to hide, he does. This leads into a scene of Troy searching for everyone, where he finds Gabe first and almost gets shot. He grabs him and you can choose to try to help him or try to escape. If you help him, you'll just get bodied and everyone will come out. If you try to escape, you will jump out the window and die. So, game over. So that's a bunch of different choices that lead to the same outcome, so let's now continue from that outcome. All the kids get taken downstairs and are told what is going to happen. They're going to take them all back to Carver's camp. He asks what Carlos has to say, and he just simply spits in his face. Of course, this leads into him getting beaten down, and everyone begins panicking. Javi would quietly ask Clem if she can cut his binds, to which she can, and she does so, leading to him cutting out Luke's. After beating down Carlos easily, Carver would ask if anyone else had objections, to which Chuck would stand up. Carver would ask what the old man had to say, and he would say that he wouldn't go. Carver would tell him that the only other choice was death, but Chuck cut him off, saying that he knows. Carver would say alright, and as he started, Chuck would pull out his revolver and shoot one of his men before being gunned down right after. Carver, looking at the man's dead body, would then use that as a premise for a speech about how some people just don't understand the value of life. Meanwhile, Luke would be cutting Kenny's binds. Carver would say that it was time to go and turn around, but that's when Luke would attempt to run. He would be seen and almost shot, but Javi was able to grab the gun and stop them. He struggled against Troy until Carver punched Javi in the face. Kenny would then rush Carver and chaos would begin to ensue. Everyone would be running around, but eventually the whole group would be rounded up, with no one knowing where Luke went. Carver would then roll everyone into the trucks, and they would be taken to house. This would mean that the group doesn't meet Sarita, Walter, or Matthew, which may be better, as all three of them die after meeting our group. And that would then end episode 2. So now that we're on to our third episode, our group is in Carver's truck. Everyone would be talking about Chuck's death, why Luke ran, and what they were going to do. Although Kenny wouldn't be as enraged as he was, since he is somewhat of a coward here. He's developed a little bit, but not nearly as much as he did after losing his family. They would make it out and be forced into house, where they would meet Reggie, and Alvin would go to Carver's office. Clem now gets the opportunity to run around and talk to everyone. You'd be able to talk to Ben about Nick, and also Reggie's arm, where Ben would say that he's glad he wasn't there for it, as he probably would have fainted from seeing the blood. You could talk to Katja about how she doesn't like being prisoner again, like with the St. John's. Talk to Javi and Kate about if Javi's alright by getting punched by Carver and how Kate is doing. You'd find Krista talking with Rebecca about having a kid and stuff like that. You get the idea. Overall, just more characters to do even more with. In the morning, Carlos would be told to slap Sarah for talking, and all the moms there would actually step in and try to tell him that he doesn't need to do that. Carver would ignore them, and Carlos would end up doing it anyway, because, he doesn't want anyone to die. Carver would then look at Krista along with her baby and tell her to give it to him. She is shocked, but he repeats himself, saying that she can't work if she has to hold it. Omid would tell Carver to calm down and that he'll work extra in her place, but Carver does not give up. He says no, everyone needs to pull their own weight, and so he then forces it out of Krista's hands. She wants to fight back, but any more commotion could end up dropping the baby. He then walks out with it in his arms, and everyone would go back to their workstations. This part of the game would go the same until Clementine has to help Sarah. This is because Mariana, Gabe, and Duck would also be there. So now the 5 of them work, and you can choose whether you help Sarah or not. But if you don't, the others can cover instead. Since there's 5 of them, even if Sarah barely does anything, it's still a lot more than just Clem and Sarah. This would lead into Reggie surviving, and Carver would actually compliment him and all the kids. After that, Carver goes to bring nails to the boys, but Kenny wouldn't ever attack Mike. This is because other people would be there. And also, like I said, he isn't as sporadic as he is in canon. I think that's what sporadic means. The walkers would bust in, but once again, because there's more people, they would solve it easier. Clementine would not meet Luke though, because the trip from the cabin to house is far longer than when they came from the lodge in canon. This would mean that Luke wouldn't be able to keep up, and thusly would take longer to show up. Clem would talk to Carver, and that would go about the same. However, what wouldn't be the same is what happens next. Luke never shows up, so the walkie-talkie plan never happens, which means Kenny's plan of using the PA system and walking through the walkers would take center stage. They would never steal the walkie-talkies, and because of this, Kenny would never lose his eye. Let's go, Kenny! That was probably cringe, but yeah, I don't care, bro. Kenny's fire. Because Luke didn't show up, Clementine doesn't have a reason to run off. This would mean that she would just continue working until Carver would reveal that he found Luke. At night, Clem would sneak into Carver's office and blast the volume. Alvin would then make his last stand as she escapes, leaving him to die. Clementine then returns to find Carver scolding everyone and holding Krista's baby. We last left off with Clementine returning to see Carver holding Krista's baby while aiming a gun at everyone. Clementine is forced to reveal herself rather than attacking, as she doesn't want to hurt the baby. As she is getting down, Kenny would aim the pistol at Carver, telling him to hand the kid over. Carver would smile and aim the gun at the baby instead. And that is when everyone would yell out. Carver would say that he would do it, and Omid would actually rush him trying to save his child, but Carver would shoot him in the chest. At the same time, Kenny shot his hand, so he dropped the gun. Javi would then punch him and take the baby, and Krista would be crying over Omid. While Carver is on the ground, Kenny would actually express that he was sad as well, and would aim the gun at Carver. Everyone from the original group would surround Omid as he dies, and Carver would say that it all could have been avoided if they just... Kenny would shoot out both of his knees, but there wouldn't actually be as brutal of a death this time. I'm sure Rebecca would probably shoot him and maybe kick him a couple times, but nothing as gruesome as what Kenny did. This is cause, you know...
I am a Christian man.
Reggie would also now join the group, and they would walk outside. They would all get covered in guts, and Troy would still get shot by Jane, and they would walk through the herd until Carlos would be shot in the neck, leading to everyone getting attacked and Sarah running off. Mariana would chase after her as she didn't want to lose her friend. This time though, there's no Sarita to be attacked. Instead, it would be Katja. She would be trying to save Duck from a walker because he was starting to panic, and that led her to be bitten on the arm. Clementine can make the same choice of either killing the walker or chopping her arm off. And that ends episode 3. In episode 4, the consequence of Clem's choice would show like it did in canon. Chopping off Katja's arm would lead her to being bitten again and left behind, although Kenny and Duck are much harder to get away than Kenny was in canon. If you killed the walker, Kenny would then take her back like with Sarita in canon. Luke, Nick, and Ben would then chase after Sarah, with Nick getting shot in the shoulder. Clementine would go along with Rebecca, Kristen, the baby, and Jane. Jane would ask if Rebecca was going to keep the baby, which would offend both her and Krista. However, she would tell Rebecca to calm down once she insults Jane's sister. They've already had enough problems in the group, so they just need to cool it off. They would make it back to the group where they find everyone minus those who went after Sarah. Kate, Gabe, and Javi would be sad about losing Mariana, and Javi would actually be the first to suggest going after them. Gabe also wants to go, but there are already enough people away from the group, so it would be best for a smaller group to go. Clementine would apologize to Kenny for what happened, and he would be hostile, but only for a little bit before breaking down. Duck would also not know how to handle this, and would be traumatized from seeing his own mother die. Javi, Jane, and Clementine would then go off. They travel out to find Sarah and the others, but come across a walker. In canon it was Nick, but here it's Ben. It would also be entirely dead this time. They would then get the walker's attention with the car horn, and the three would rush in, finding Luke and Nick standing by Sarah and Mariana. Mari would be trying to comfort her friend and try to convince her to leave. She would relate her struggle to the one she faced, and the fact that her dad disappeared just as it all began. However, this of course wouldn't fully work. Clementine would then try to help as Nick, Jane, and Luke protected the doorway. You would then have to choose to slap Sarah or leave her, which determines whether she survives or not. Everyone besides maybe Sarah, depending on your choice, makes it out and heads toward the group. On the way, Nick would tell about what happened to Ben. The two of them were trying to protect Mari when a walker snuck up on Nick. Of course, since Ben had formed a bond with him up to this point, he tried to save him, which led to him being bit instead. Ben told Nick to put him out of his misery as his worst fear was being eaten, and he didn't want to feel the pain. Nick feels angry at himself because if it weren't for his bullet wound, he could have done something. Clementine and Luke would reassure him that it wasn't his fault, and Clem would continue. She would say how Ben used to mess up and stuff, and how he was always scared. But in the end, he put that behind him to save his friend. Nick would take that and would actually be hopeful, realizing that he could still redeem himself. They would then return, and Gabe would ask where Ben is, but they all know the answer. Everyone would suggest for Clementine to check up on Kenny, and so she would, but first she would talk to Duck. She would remind him to keep his head up and that they'll get through it. However, first they'll have to help his dad. Duck would reluctantly agree, and the two would walk into Kenny's tent. They would then have to talk to him and try to help him, which would work. Kenny would accept that he shouldn't let Katja suffer if he still has her, and although still broken, he has to be there for his son. Kenny would then take Katja out and put her down, once again, if you have her. The group then splits up to search nearby areas, with Jane going alone and Mike and Bonnie going together. Clem then chooses which one to go to before eventually doing both. Nick would be with Luke securing the perimeter, and Mariana would be trying to help with Sarah if she's still alive. When you're with Jane, you choose whether or not to rob Arvo of the drugs like in canon. Jane would threaten Arvo, and then Clementine would return back to the group. As she's walking back, Luke and Nick walk up, with Luke asking about Jane. As the three were about to separate, Nick bumped Luke on the shoulder and smiled before telling Clementine to come on. The two would return to the group, and Kenny would be helping Rebecca like he did in canon. Clem would be able to talk to everyone like Mari, Reggie, Javi, Gabe, Kate, Duck, Nick, and Krista. She would then help Mike and Bonnie, and upon their return, a herd would begin to roll up on the group. Kenny wouldn't go ape on a walker this time though, since he isn't feeling as bad as in canon. The group would then fall back, with some of them fighting the walkers a bit, but eventually they would all make it up to the observation deck to find Luke and Jane, like in canon. Krista, Reggie, Kate, Mari, Duck, and Sarah would all stay inside with Kenny and Rebecca, and yes, Sarah would stay because I think that with that many more people, they can stop her from going out because she isn't helping the people fight the walkers at all. They would eventually have to drop the whole deck, but Sarah would actually survive, which means that Sarah is entirely determinate. Or is she? Rebecca would give birth to AJ, and the group would sleep with Jane leaving. Clem would then choose when they leave to stop everyone arguing, and eventually they would leave. However, that's when they encounter Arvo and his group. They threaten our group, and everyone pulls out their guns. Clementine sees Rebecca turn, and she either shoots her or calls for help, in which case someone else shoots her. But that would then end episode 4. Episode 5 would begin with the gunfight actually taking place. Clementine's eyes would open to see Reggie on the ground with blood all over him. While there are more people in our group, there aren't many more guns than there were, so if anything, there are just more targets. One of these targets, if you managed to save her before, would be Sarah. She ultimately would have been shot, and Luke would try to carry her to safety. That is when he would get shot in the leg, like in the original. Clementine would see AJ on the ground, and she would be left with the choice of either going to get AJ or going to Luke. However, if she goes to Luke, then Nick would run in to get AJ, since Luke is already injured, so he can't do it. The group wouldn't actually need Jane's help this time though, since Javi would help to take the last guy out. Jane would still have returned though, thinking that she could help if she arrived on time, however, unfortunately she was too late. However, now she's here, so she might as well stick around. Meanwhile, Luke and Clementine would be trying to comfort Sarah as well as stop the bleeding. Everyone would begin to gather around as she tries speaking, but ultimately can't. They would be trying their best to do something to help, however, it would just be too late. Everyone would actually get emotional, and Kenny would then turn on Arvo. He would still be treated poorly like Kenny and still get hit a few times, but he wouldn't go so far as to, beat him down like he did in the original.
I am a Christian man.
Because Kenny isn't missing an eye, we also unfortunately do not get the bandage changing scene. However, we would get something of him and Duck trying to enjoy some time together. They would then arrive at the power plant place, and we would get the same campfire scene, but with Kate and Nick indulging in the bottle, while Javi doesn't. Kenny also doesn't, as he wants to set a good example for Duck, and would try to take first watch. However, he wouldn't be as stubborn as he was in canon. Everyone would go to sleep and travel to the house in the morning. They would walk across the ice, and Luke would still get stuck. This time though, Bonnie isn't the only one trying to help him, as Nick would as well. This means that when the ice cracks and Luke falls in with Bonnie, Nick would jump in as well, grabbing Luke. He pushed him up as much as possible, leading to him being dragged down by a walker. Luke manages to survive with the help of Nick, with Clementine pulling him up. However, this does mean that Bonnie is not able to be saved. This would complete Nick's character arc that I set up along with Ben, saving his best friend and proving himself to not just be a screw-up. This is something that honestly should have been dealt with more in the games, as he never really redeems himself despite the clear setup. But now Luke and potentially Clem would have to warm themselves up with the fire. Luke would be cold, trying to sputter out some words about how Nick was just gone so fast and that he sacrificed himself, as well as Bonnie. Kenny would be getting increasingly more angry, as they just lost 3 people because of Arvo. First Reggie, now Nick and Bonnie, and 4 if Sarah died. However, the group would remind him to keep himself calm, as they need to focus on Luke, Clementine, and AJ. He would do so reluctantly, also worrying about Duck. Jane would be worried about Kenny, but not as much as in canon, as he seems to have his head more on straight. This is due to Duck still being alive. Kenny tries to get the truck working, and eventually does. However, it would be decided almost unanimously that they would go to Wellington. Basically, everyone from our original group agrees, that being Kenny, Javi, Kate, Krista, and the kids. The only people who don't are Luke, Mike, and Jane. Kenny would then say that there probably isn't enough room for anyone anyway, so Mike would then ask if he was serious, implying that they were going to leave them behind. It ultimately becomes a, but it's cold, the kids might die, versus Wellington has stuff, so they won't die. That's basically what happened in canon too. Luckily though, because Kenny's outbursts aren't as frequent and they aren't even that bad, plus most of the group sided with him, Mike and Arvo don't try to leave. There are currently 12 people, not counting the 2 babies, so that would mean 5 inside the truck and 7 sitting in the back. I'm not sure if that's actually manageable or not though. I'm sure driving would be much more difficult if there are that many people who could fall out, but instead I think Mike would reveal that he talked to Arvo and he wanted to go someplace else with him. It wouldn't be fair to just leave him, plus they know there might not be enough space. Jane would also consider leaving, but she thinks that maybe she can have something here. Plus Luke is injured, so, you know, the one person that she might actually care about besides Clementine, it's kind of looking like she needs to be there. Kenny asks Luke, and he says that he's staying all the way. The group decided, so, I mean, he's not leaving. So now that it's 11 people in the truck, it is a bit more manageable. They would drive for a while until they eventually had to walk through the snow because of the fuel problem. Everyone would make it to the little truck stop place and rethink the plan. Part of the group is kind of reluctant once again, but Kenny ensures them that they can make this work. They then spend the next almost 2 weeks trying to find Wellington, until eventually they do. However, unfortunately, that's when they're told that they're over capacity. They give them the bag of supplies, and there really isn't a take the kids moment either, because I think Krista and Kenny are more attached to their kids. And even if they did give up the kids, that would be 2 babies, Duck, Clementine, Maury, and Gabe. So yeah, that's way more than in canon. So even if they did do that, there still wouldn't be enough room. And so now our group of Clementine, Kenny, Duck, Javi, Kate, Gabe, Mariana, Krista, her baby, Luke, Jane, and AJ would then leave Wellington. Jane would then once again recommend her idea of heading back to House, which Kenny isn't liking all too much, but it's fine. Everyone else also agrees since they've already done Kenny's plan, so now it's time to take the second best option. They would then take a long time to make it back to House, where they would find the family from Jane's ending. Because they went all the way to Wellington and then all the way back, they arrived a lot later, so the family has already made the place their own. This also means that the supplies would be lower than in canon, so that's just some foreshadowing. Our group would show up and explain their situation on how they had already been there before. The family would then welcome them in, and it would basically end similarly to Jane's ending if you let the family in. Clementine and the kids would meet the new boy, and the adults would introduce each other to the parents. So before we get into the actual game, we're going to have to go through all the Clementine flashbacks in order to set up the season. This time, they would be a bit different, and going in order, we would have Jane and Clementine deciding on a middle name for AJ. This would likely also involve Krista trying to find one for Omid Jr., though I don't think Kenny or Luke would be options for either, since they're both still alive. Options I could see would be Lee, Rebecca, David, maybe Kat, something like that. It's really not a big deal, but what is a big deal is that the flashback wouldn't end in Jane's suicide. Rather, I think she might actually decide to stay alive. This is because in the original, she truly did care for Clementine, and I don't think that would change much here. The only difference would be that there would be more people who could support her with her pregnancy. Kenny has gone through the same thing multiple times now, and Krista is literally a mom, and that's not to mention Luke is alive, so he would be there to help her, and the whole group. Like, yeah, I really don't see her offing herself. It just wouldn't work. The small family that they met at the end of the last season would still make off with some of the supplies, but overall, the group would be just fine. At some point, they would decide to leave House due to the limited supplies. Jane's child would be born, and it would be a girl named Jamie after her sister. The group would eventually be camping out one night, and the scene with AJ and the hand puppets would go roughly the same, just with everyone else there. Luke and Jane would actually also be revealed to have taken on more of a real relationship, and one day Kenny would find a car, and they would later use it for driving lessons on the kids. However, one good thing to note would be that Kenny would be reminded by Duck to wear his seatbelt, so if Clem does make them crash, he'll survive. Kinda like another What If I Did. But anyway, the next flashback would be Clementine and the group running through the woods from walkers. They would make it into the weird home thingy that Clem found in canon, and it would be extremely packed, like unbelievably claustrophobic. And yeah, I don't think any of them would die, since if you look in the clip, all the walkers are a good distance away, so as long as the group stays together, they should be fine. Ava would then come in telling them about the new frontier, and how a big group like them would be a great help. And not to mention, they've got multiple babies that need specific things that they have there. No matter whether Clem agrees or not, the majority of the group would, and so they would then join them, and that would lead to Javier and his family reuniting with David. This would be really cool, but Kate would not want to be there since David is there. However, Javi put in a good word for his group, leading to David allowing AJ to take the vancomycin. This means no one ever gets forced out, and now we would be able to go into the present events of the game. So obviously none of the stuff with Clementine or Javi's family would ever happen, which means that the new frontier would never have a grudge against them. However, I do think that at some point, they would go after Prescott because they had already attacked many settlements, so it would happen eventually. This would lead to Tripp, Conrad, and Eleanor being the only survivors of the attack. I think Francine would still be caught on a run and used as some sort of chip to take over the settlement peacefully, but Badger would just go nuts and attack like he did originally. The 3 survivors would then get blocked by a car, moving it and then driving to Richmond. This would be because there's no injured Kate, so the necessity to send the car off wouldn't be there. They would fight through the walkers in order to get into the car, and eventually would do so. This means that they wouldn't meet Jesus. And also, I'd like to point something out. I totally missed the opportunity in my What If Kenny Survived series to have Kenny say,
"I am a Christian man,"
when he met Jesus, and in this series he's alive, but neither he nor Jesus appears here. I guess even the universe wants me to stop with the
"I am a Christian man"
joke. But anyway, they would head to Richmond, which they would find out was New Frontier due to Max being on watch. They would then choose to leave, but David would step out, hearing all the commotion about Prescott being attacked. David would then put them into quarantine and then talk to Javi about it, and then return to quarantine where Javi would listen and ask questions as well. Afterward, they take them to Joan, who would kick the 3 out and warn David and Javi. However, while David would decide not to risk his life for 3 strangers, Javi and Luke would. They're the kind of people who won't let people die, especially if they have this kind of information on their home. They need to know more. David then decides that he'll have to go help out his brother, and so the 3 head out. In their path, they would find the 3 struggling for survival and being saved by Jesus. So yes, I can finally make the
"I am a Christian man"
joke. Oh wait, Kenny isn't here. Anyway, they would then all meet and join forces to go to the greenhouse. There they would find Max, Badger, and Lonnie and confront them. Lonnie would be chased down, Max would be handled, and Badger would be fighting Javi. Javi would eventually win, and then be forced to kill him or leave him there. Tripp might also do it if he's silent long enough, but anyway, the group would then either kill Max or take him back as proof for Joan. This would all practically go the same with the group breaking back into Richmond after Jesus chooses to leave. Javi would then go and get the rest of the group, telling them of everything and how they need to help to stand against it. David's house would have Kate, Mari, and Gabe, so no conflict there. Instead, Kate would argue with David that they should leave. Javi would then bust in to help David, and the 2 would be captured and locked up. Javi's brother would be taken by Joan, and Javi would then find a way out with Gabe's help. They make it to Eleanor's place, and everyone prepares a plan. Javi, Ava, and Gabe would all go to the armory, and that would all go the same. There would be no Clementine and Lingard scenes since both her and AJ would be back with Eleanor. Gabe wouldn't lash out about Conrad's death since he's still alive, and then he would go along with Javi, Kate, Mari, and Clem to go get the truck. Once there, Kate would confess to Javi her feelings, and he can choose whether or not he feels the same. They would pull up to the town meeting the next morning, and would find David about to be hung. Not only that, but everyone from the group, excluding the parents, are there too. This means Tripp and Ava, since Eleanor talked her way out of it because she's a doctor. Joan then forced Javi to choose, and she would kill the one he picked to live. Clint would then make a deal, leaving you with the option to either shoot Joan or take the deal, and either way everything would go down. Kate would finally crash the truck. Everyone would escape the destruction, and all the stuff with David and Eleanor would happen. Ava or Tripp would be found, and you would go through the helicopter and all that, leading to them dying anyway. Everyone else would stay behind for their families, and David would then go crazy and fight Javi, leading to him about to take Gabe and Mari and leave. They don't want to leave behind the group. No, the family that they've been in, and they want David to be a part of it. Their father has been gone for so long, but he still has a part in their life. That's when David realizes that what they're saying is true and decides that he won't make the mistake of leaving again. I mean, by this point, he's already been with them for so long, even before the game began. So it kind of makes sense for him to come to his senses. The family would then all work together to save Richmond, and this would lead to all of them surviving. Yeah, overall, the entire group we had from Season 2 survived Season 3 as well. And one other difference would be that Clementine wouldn't leave. This is because AJ is of course with them, and everyone else has a much happier life here and would rather just live than go out again. Of course, David and Kate distanced themselves, but other than that, it really is a much more happy ending for our group. Now we know a war happens in Season 4 that goes from Richmond to the coast, and that means Richmond would be hit. Luckily though, the developers have told us that Javi and his family are safe where no tragic plot events can befall them, and that along with Abel mentioning Richmond also tells me that it is still around. So unfortunately, I will not be continuing this series despite how much I would like to, but I will instead tell you what happens to everyone from season 4 without Clementine. So because she isn't there, they have no idea to go to the train station, meaning that Brody and Marlon would survive. Lily would then come asking for more recruits, to which Marlon would give Violet and a sim. A sim because he already seemed to be kind of challenging Marlon, and Violet because he knew he sent Sophie and Minnie before, and she would probably be happier if they were there. Marlon isn't an evil guy, he still cares about his friends, he's just scared. This would mean that basically the entirety of season 4 wouldn't happen, and you could say that Lily might come back for all of them, but if she does without Clem, they won't be able to win that fight. This would lead to most of them either captured or killed, and if some managed to escape, they would likely be captured when trying to free the prisoners. So essentially, everything would go far differently and far worse for season 4 group, but that's what happens when what ifs end early. And speaking of which, yeah, it really does kind of suck that this what if couldn't go on any longer, but I just don't see how this version of events would make our characters end up in the same place they did in canon. But anyway, that's the finale of this series, so if you have enjoyed this series at all, please do be sure to like and subscribe, and just comment your thoughts on it, and just let me know what you think I should do next, I guess. I already have some ideas in mind, but any sort of support on this series helps. But anyway, if you enjoyed this series, please subscribe to see more Walking Dead content on this channel. But as always, tell me if you liked this series, comment your requests for future videos, and subscribe. Thank you for watching. Have a great day.